I'm the Soundtracker, and I want to talk to you today about repairing tape decks. Now, I love tape, or if you want to get pedantic about it, I love the compact cassette. Now, this is one of the first mediums that I ever remember listening to music on, and throughout my life there have always been tapes in my house. And a lot of my favorite music is also available in the format either natively or recording it to a blank tape. This is still one of my favorite ways to listen to an artist. That being said, the decks themselves don't always stay working over time. The mechanism needs to be maintained, and that is exactly what I'm going to be doing today. Now, this here is a Panasonic dual cassette deck. I got this thing at a tag sale when I was in my early teens. I think I was like 13 at the time. And this has served me pretty well for a number of years. Now, over time, I got curious about other decks, and I did eventually upgrade to the RX-202 over here. Yeah, Nakamichi's awesome. But I have another use for this other deck in another area of my house. Now, I pulled this thing out of storage, and much to nobody's surprise, it's only semi-functional right now. The deck is belt-driven, and this means that in order for the deck to be able to play tapes at the right speed, the belts have to be tight enough to move the tape all the time, and I want to show you an example of that in here. So if we look through the window that I've taken off here, you can see the belt moving, but for damn sure it's not supposed to move like that. This belt is old and warped, and it needs to be replaced. That was an example of only deck A, though, but let's take a look at deck B as well. Let me just get this cover off, too. It makes it a lot easier to see what's going on inside when you do. Okay. Alright, so it plays. Fast forwards. And rewind, it's a little bit sluggish on. Yeah, that needs a bit of a belt change too. This deck has served me well for a number of years, and I owe it to this machine to keep it alive. Now, that being said, I know a lot of people are shopping for used cassette decks at this point in time, and if you happen to get one, I wanted to show that it can sometimes be easier than you might assume to get this kind of thing working. Now, the last time I repaired something, I went in with a manual and preparation and a whole bunch of jazz around that, but this time, I want to go in blind, and we're going to discover the insides together. So let's open this thing up and see what we see. Alright, so let's start taking this apart. We've already got the two front doors off, and those come off just by lifting them off. And now's a good time to start with observation, because generally, depending on the age of your cassette deck, something might have to come off of the front in order for the front panel to come off. And what that will generally entail is that there will be a slider, or there will be a couple of switches somewhere. These ones are all recessed into the deck. So I have no trouble believing that I could very easily pull this off without the switches being affected. But it's a good time to take a look at the front of the deck and notice, does it have a switch or something that looks like it's covering it? If it does, usually they pull off pretty easily. As for instance, here's the power knob of an old receiver. Well, this faceplate is not coming off without this power knob coming off. Things like that may or may not be present on the cassette deck that you're personally working on, but for the purposes of this, I don't have to worry about it. I just wanted to bring it up as a possibility. Given the general time this deck was made, though, I don't really think I'm going to run into that problem because this looks recessed enough, and yeah, I can see behind here there's little areas where the switch actually connects to, so this is going to come off pretty easily anyway. So I'm not worried about that. Let's get inside. I also wanted, while I'm doing this, just talk a little bit about Panasonic, because Panasonic isn't generally like one of the manufacturers that I think of usually when I think of hi-fi, or when I think of pretty much anything to do with like televisions or radios or even phones. But like Panasonic is also just like a brand that continues to surprise me. This thing held up a heck of a lot longer than any of the other decks that I've worked on previously, and to that effect, I also just have a couple of other Panasonic items in the house, and I don't know why it never really comes up, Panasonic being one of the better manufacturers of things. I mean, you might have heard of this particular brand on screen. Yep, that's Panasonic. So, it's just always kind of been interesting to me that they don't come up more in conversation with, you know, brands like Pioneer or something. Anyway, let's get inside of this. Alright, no screws on the back, so this should just lift up. There we go. Okay, up and off with you. Come on. Jesus. Am I a vampire? Do I need your permission to get inside of you? Jesus. There we go. Piece of crap. Alright, so with the deck open now, it's a good time for a little bit more general observation, and I like working on decks of this particular era, which would be mid to late 80s, because everything is really nicely laid out and easy to service. Now, I mean, just taking a look at the board itself, let's get a close-up. Let's get closer to that. Here. All the different capacitors and resistors are all nicely laid out. We've got all the potentiometers over here. You can tell what's supposed to be for deck A and deck B, what's left and right. That this particular section pertains to the playback gain. Where the hell's the Dolby stuff? This thing has Dolby Type B. Where the hell's the Dolby stuff? And even over here on the sides, you've got labelings for the A deck and the B deck over here, which, you know, it's pretty obvious what everything does inside of here, and I really like that about this. Other than that, and it might not look it from this angle, but these are actually pretty easy to take out from this angle. I've worked on a lot of really, really tightly crammed decks before, and having a deck that has a nice open space to maneuver things in is a real plus for me, especially when I'm working on one. The other thing that I like is it's also really, really easy to see the inner workings of the transport. You might need a flashlight or two, but you can really see how all the gears and belts interact with each other, and from here you can get a good idea of what you might actually need. And what we can gather at this, just from a sideways glance of it, is that it has 3 belts that operate it. 2 of them are what are called square belts, and the third one is what's called a flat belt. Now, before we head over to eBay to do a little shopping for what belts we need, there's also one other thing that I want to take into account. Does this particular cassette deck have something called an idler tire? So in a lot of different cassette decks, and that includes decks of this era, there's something called the idler tire, and what that does is it sits on a motor that swings back and forth between the take-up reel and the supply reel. And the reason that it does that is because in order for a tape to actually play, it has to advance along the entire tape transport. And that's what you're looking at right now. The tape transport takes the tape from the left side and brings it over to the right side. And it's the tape passing across the heads that actually makes sound. Now, all of that is generally driven by a couple of different belts and an idler tire, but in this particular case, we don't have one. If we did, we would have a motor right about here in the center. Yep, right, yeah, this thing right here. Yeah, that I have my hand so gingerly on right now. This right here is the belt that controls this particular deck's idler. And what's happened here is that there's a plastic cog inside of there with teeth, and the cog itself is what swings back and forth between them, but in order for it to drive, this one is connected to the deck's main motor down here. So we don't need to worry about getting an idler tire for this particular deck. So for further proof on the subject anyway, to get a sort of half-assed better look at this, you can see right down at the bottom there, that's where the whole belt system is. And then in front there you can see it's directly connected to a little plastic gear right there. And that gear is what swings between the take-up reel and the supply reel on this deck. So we definitely do not need an idler tire. Alright, so we're over here on eBay, and what I want to do first is check and see if anyone happens to be selling a full belt kit for the cassette deck that I'm fixing. So, let me see. Panasonic RS-363, which is the model number of the cassette deck. Let's try belt kit. And as is tradition, there's maybe 1 or 2 belt kits for something that's entirely not related. And
Lovely. Belt kits for something that's not even a cassette deck. What the hell? Oh, timing belt kit. But none of that is since what? Really? Audi? Why are... Granted, I get car shopping is a little bit more popular on eBay, but it's surprising to me that I can put in something specifically like a cassette deck and still get belts for something else. It's kind of how the search engine works on most websites, I think. But, okay, so that's failed. Let's try something else here. At this point, I want to put in a nice little word about, shall we say, mass production. Because I've got another one here, and this might come as a bit of a surprise, but let's see this here. So if you can't find the belt specifically for this deck, mass production has a funny way of taking the insides and outsides of things and reusing them. I mean, one of my favorite instances is the Atari Jaguar. Yeah, I can't believe a game console is now being repurposed, at least as far as the shell is concerned, for that. It looks funny to me. But, so, in this particular case, let's see. 88. Technics. RS-363. Yeah. Does that deck look a little bit familiar? Mass production will never ever cease to amuse me, and since Technics is owned by Panasonic itself, I guess this is okay. Oh god, this is the exact same deck with a different face. All the way down to the back of it, too. So, since I just happen to know that this one existed, let's see if I can find belts for that one, because Technics is a little bit of a more popular IP for this, so let's see, Technics... what is that, RSD190W belt kit. Well, and that's some. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and, before I invest myself in this, these do actually look correct, but before I go in on whether or not I'm going to purchase these, I want to just take a look and see what the RS-180 looks like. So, copy, and so, RSD180W, yep. So, it looks similar enough on the outside, so this is just one possible option. It might actually work. I mean, if the outside is as similar to my deck, then I'm going to give the general okay to that, because this might actually work in terms of replacing belts. But let me just go back to the last page there. So if you want to take a gamble on these specific belts, it might be worthwhile doing so, and hopefully that would work. But let's say, just for the example's sake, we don't want to actually go and purchase those because there might be something a little bit slightly off about the interior workings of the deck. Well, in that particular case, we're going to just search in general for cassette tape belts. And usually these are the kinds of things that you're going to be just shown from eBay. This is all going to be... Oh, God. And I've just knocked a whole bunch of crap over. Nice. So, I'll worry about that later. Anyhow, so all the belts up here are the just the general square belts that you're going to see inside of the drive mechanism. But one of the belts is a flat belt. So, aside from just getting one of these kind of mixed sets of belts, we're also going to need flat belts. And yeah, they looked to be about these sizes, so yeah, it's really just going through and purchasing a couple of general sets of belts, and we're going to be figuring out which ones fit inside of the deck just by sight. So that's what I've done here.
Alright, so you've been on eBay and you've seen it, you've taken a look at the different kind of parts you're going to need, and it's probably a good time to bring up that I have my own, shall we say, hefty supply of these things, largely because I do this kind of an awful lot. I've been into a lot of different kinds of decks, whether they be tape CD, 8-track, something or other will always need a belt replacement, and they're just pretty common and easy to find for me, so I just kind of have a stash of them on the off chance I'll have to repair a tape deck or something. But I have a feeling that everything that I'm going to need is right here in my little black box, because this is where I keep all the spares. So, let's get started. Alright, so getting a deck fixed usually starts with the powers of observation again, and it looks to me like the entire transport mechanism comes out by the general 5 screws here, but I don't think I actually need to take the entire transport out. I want to try and get this board out of the way, which looks like it's held on by these 2 screws here. So I'm going to try that first, and if that doesn't work, then I'll take apart the whole rest of the transport mechanism. But let's start there and see what happens, because I've had good luck with that in the past, and I'm hoping for more of it today. So, board's coming off. I'd also like to take a minute to say while I'm doing this that I really admire decks that go out of their way to have bits on them that aren't soldered, because having a socket right there would make this a heck of a lot easier to disassemble. So that's the one criticism that I can really bring to this deck right now, because trying to get everything off and you have soldered connections means it stays on in some fashion. So let's get this out of here. Okay, and let's see what we see behind the board now. Well, boy am I glad I brought up soldering, because, as it stands, this is soldered directly into this board here, and this is a leaf switch for the inside of the deck to tell probably what type of tape it is, or that there's a tape inside of it at all. So, that's not coming off as easily as I thought it might, which makes that almost impossible now. So, I'm going to put those 2 screws back in, and then we're going to try and take out the entire assembly here. Now that I know that method 1 won't work, let's go in for method 2. Get the bit on there first. Jesus, I wish this were magnetic. This is absolutely one of the most belligerent screws I've ever worked on. Wow. It's probably going to strip. I wonder if my drill will attach to this. You know what? Now seems like a good time to find out. Alright, let's see if this will do what I want it to. The answer's probably no, but we'll find out. Well, did the opposite of what I wanted it to, bent the hell out of one of my tools, but cool. At least I know that won't work now. Alright, well, if the stupid set of torque doesn't work, then the smarter set of torque might. So let's try this out and see what we get. Can't believe I ever considered that. What the hell was I thinking? Tell you what I was thinking. I was thinking that if I do this and it doesn't work, then all of this is going to be for nothing. Let's try that other bit because that one doesn't fit properly. Ah, there we go. Okay. So, the biggest problem that I seem to have with screws is that I don't really have the right leverage to get them out. And having a socket wrench on hand, as much as I know I guess they're supposed to be for cars, it really helps in getting really, really stubbornly tight screws out of these things. Because as you can see, that worked. And I'm really glad I have that thing. If you can, invest yourself in a socket wrench. These things are really handy. Okay, give me that. There. Screw number 2 over here. Aha! And now is also a good time to mention that I have 2 screws loose. No pun intended. It's a good idea to keep them in somewhat of a decent track because some of them are going to be different sizes than others. This stubborn one right here, this one was the one that was on the bottom of the deck that I couldn't get out, and this one over here, that one's from the top of the deck. So I'm going to have to lay these out in some fashion to where I can tell where they were supposed to go initially. Now, I talked about a particular stress test that I like to do in another video to see if anything else needs to come out. And I'm pretty sure there's another screw on this side of the deck. Aha! It's down there on the bottom. Another reason the socket wrenches come in handy is because sometimes the angles that you have to get into are just not pleasing. If I were to try to do this with a straight screwdriver, this is probably not going to come out. But with a socket wrench, if you have an angle like that, here we go. Much better. Yeah, this is one of the most inconvenient things I've ever had to take apart. Okay. At least I've broken it free, so the tension was good on that. Let's see if the straight one actually does a decent job at getting it out. Alright, I think I got it. Sideways, but I got it. Jeez. Ah! Alright. And now with that, there's a little bit more give on this side, so that's much easier, and I can tell everything else is on the other side of this deck now. So let's get in there. As it turns out, my now bent extension may come in handy. Alright, so through the powers of non-observation, I've also just made a lovely little new discovery. That nothing that I own fits inside of there. I cannot get inside of this crevice with the socket wrench. I cannot get inside of this and have it work with the tool. So, this entire front assembly has to come off. So we're going to be doing that next. All of this just to get inside of the first deck. Did I say anything complimentary about this being a well-designed piece of machinery? Because I was wrong. Alright, so we're off to a bit of a shaky start, but we're here at the front of the deck again, and if we look underneath here, yeah, we've got several screws holding the front on. So let's get cracking at them. It's kind of a general rule of thumb that the faceplate usually has to come off of everything anyway, so I don't know why I didn't think to do this before, but yes I do. I didn't do this before because I wanted this to be an easy repair. I didn't really realize just sometimes how back-asswards some things are designed even when they look really simple to begin with. So, now that we've gotten those off, let's see how well we do pulling the faceplate off. And if that will even help my current predicament, because if it doesn't, then I'm kind of stuck on the satellite of love, if you get my drift. Got a sneaking suspicion about the feet, too. Swear to God, I bet these things have to come off in order to get... Yep, felt like something's looser now. I'm pretty sure those have to come out, too. Ah. Alas. And it seems to me that the last things that are holding it in place are these, because the rest of those screws are also connected to whatever's affixed to the front of the deck. So, let's go. Moment of truth. Did that do it? Oh, it's much looser. Yeah, that did it! Alright, perfect. Okay, now we're making some progress. Perfect, okay. I don't know why the hell I thought that would be easy. Jeez. Okay. Give me 1 second here. Alright, wonderful. Now that we've come this far, I don't believe I ever thought this deck was going to be easy to take apart. I mean, most of the time decks of this era are, and apparently I'm wrong all the time. Okay, so now that we've gotten this thing off of here, let's see, what's the easiest way to get at the rest of it? So, now that I have this thing free from that, I can finally get at this screw, which is the one I've been trying to get at for ages now. Because I believe that ought to... Yep, okay. Yep, that's definitely going to come off. Perfect. Okay. Yes. All right. Side note, I generally find a good way to get these things out is to hit the eject button on the other side. Because for some reason that just releases all of the tension. And be a little careful with the mechanism too, because the head is immediately exposed, and if that hits anything, it's going to come out of alignment. So, yeah, just something to watch out for. So now that we've gotten this out of here, we can get a closer look at it. And essentially, it looks as though I'd have to take off some more screws on the side here, and now it's just occurred to me we're actually going to have to leave that top screw off if I'm going to take that extra bit off. And now seems like a good idea to talk about the Japanese Industrial Standard, also known as the Jizz. And I bring that up because this looks pretty much exactly like a Phillips head. It's not, and that's the irritating part. Japanese Industrial Standard is its own specific type of head, and cassette decks are typically made up of a nice little mishmash of Japanese Industrial Standard screws and regular Phillips head type screws. And that's where it gets a little complicated, because the JIS ones will absolutely strip if you try and use a regular screwdriver in them. So, it's generally best to have JIS screwdriver on hand if you plan on going inside of these. I don't know why I didn't think to mention that sooner. It wasn't relevant yet. Okay, let's... Guess leave that hanging on there. Okay. We'll just be extra careful with that later. Ah, there we go. Okay, now we get to the belts, and that's really complicated. Wow. I don't know why I always go into these things assuming they'll be easy. Alright. Let's get that out of there. More importantly, getting new ones back in. Jeez. Alright, and to get this last one out, it just kind of goes over everything, doesn't it? Yeah, it does. Okay. Oh boy. Okay. Got him. Okay, are both of these the same size? No, they're not. Okay, so what's important to remember here is that the smallest one goes on the inside of that. And this one had better go with the other belt, which is over down here now. Okay. So, we've got our motor belts, we've got the, what was it? The idler belt here, and, okay, so we've got our two motor belts, we've got our idler belt here, and, well, let's take a look and see what we have to match them up with. So, for belts, I have a hefty hoard of replacement stuff. And generally, what I find the easiest to do in situations where you don't know what belt size you're going to be using, well, just kind of eyeballing it is the only real trick you have. But generally what you want is that these belts that you have on the side here, this is one of the old ones, you want the older ones to be a little looser than the newer ones. And I will explain that in a moment once I find a particular belt to match that up with. Alright, here we go. So this is the idler belt here, the old one, and this is the new one that I'm going to replace it with. And it is a little bit smaller than the older one. The reason that I want that is because the newer belt is supposed to be tighter. The older one is old and is going to be very loose from years of age. You can see how much stretch that has in it. That's not good. This is the reason that decks stop working over time. And so this one has far less give to it. It's a little smaller, therefore it's going to run pretty much to the original specification. So that's really what you want to look for when you're replacing out a belt. So we're going to be doing that for all three of them. This is the old one. I don't want it to get mixed up in anything, so goodbye. Since that is going to be the easiest one to replace out of the entire lot, we're going to start by putting it on here and getting it back into its position on the idler up there. Okay, gotta run that through that and on top of this, and that sets that back up where it needs to be. So that's the first belt replaced, and we can go ahead and start looking at the other two. Okay, second new belt here, match it up to the old one, and it's, yep, that's a good sign. So old belt, bye. And I'm going to set that aside for a moment because two belts have to go onto the main motor. So that's going to go up here, and where's the other flat belt? Okay, so here's the old flat belt. Let's take a look at some new ones. Yeah, and it's this lovely mess that I have to sort through right now, so give me a couple of minutes. Alright, so I've been through the entire sack, and I'm pretty sure I found the one that's going to fit. And a word on belts real quick. The reason you want to go through them like this is because having the old one be too loose is a problem, but if the new one is too tight, it's either not going to run at all or it's going to start bending stuff a little bit. So you want it to have enough give to be able to be in motion and still be, you know, all on the same distance, but tight enough to keep everything running smoothly. And that is why we have to check everything so much. Alright, so now that we've gotten the belts picked out, we can come back around to the deck itself, and I'm going to want to start by getting them both wrapped around this thing, and this is what's going to make it a bigger pain, because we have to put two belts on the same motor. So from the looks of it, yeah, okay, so we've got the larger area over here is where the flat belt is going to go, and the smaller area up front right here, this is where the the square belt is going to go. So let's take a look here and see. Flat. and square just to make sure. Yep, okay, so I'm gonna try and get this on there real quick. That needs to go around this. The square belt needs to go around this top area here. This is where the idler is actually. So I have little to no idea what that's doing there. But but it needs to be replaced anyway, and I doubt the deck can operate without it, so I'm keen on replacing it. Now, let's see. How am I gonna do this? I think what I'm going to have to do is get this on here first and then try and hook it around in some fancy-dancy way. Probably like that. Okay. Helps to find little bits where you can hook on a belt, but yeah, essentially having it in pieces like this is sometimes a bit of a pain because getting everything on there properly is kind of difficult. So I'm just going to try and string that around this, and we're going to get it all together and hope everything works. I think that's what a lot of these things are built on, hope. Now, I'd like to believe that some of this was actually made to hold onto a belt while you try and fit the other bit on top of it. And I want to try and test that theory when I put this back together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get these things on here and I'm going to try and get them onto this so that I can eventually get them onto that. And, well, let's see what happens. Okay. Yep, and I'm hopeful that this was designed with belts in mind. It does look to me like it was made to have belts going around those things, because right now they're still in place and I'm not having any issues yet, so let's try and put a couple of screws in and then we'll see about getting the rest of it together. Alright, best angle to see things from is the bottom, so take a look at that right there. You can see there's our two belts and we have to get them around the motor. So let's get something that we can do that with. Oh, okay, that's one success. Ah, there we go. That's two successes. I have never, ever gotten that right on the first try.